You are 20 years old, and your hands were built for tiny gears, not war. In Pforzheim, the town of clockmakers, you have spent every morning since you were 12 leaning over your father's workbench, fitting hairsprings so small a sneeze could scatter a week of work across the floor. Your father, Heinrich, has fingers scarred by decades of tiny screwdrivers and eyes ruined from decades of magnifying loupes. He always says the same thing when your hand trembles over a mainspring. Patience survives what courage cannot. On the morning your draft letter arrives, he does not cry and he does not salute. He walks to the back room, opens the safe where he keeps the shop's finest pieces, and presses a small silver pocket watch into your palm. It belonged to his own father, a watchmaker who died before the First War ended. Engraved inside the case in letters worn nearly smooth are the same 6 words. Patience survives what courage cannot. You do not understand yet what a rifle has to do with patience. You will. Before the war, your life is small in the way that good lives are small. Your mother keeps a garden of tomatoes behind the shop. Your best friend, Otto Kraus, works at the tannery and complains about the smell of his own clothes. And there is Ilse, the baker's daughter, who you have loved since the two of you were children racing bicycles down Leopoldstrasse. She tells you she will wait, and you believe her the way you believe the sun will rise, without needing proof. You are drafted into the Wehrmacht in early 1941. Basic training is brutal in the ordinary way all training is brutal, until an officer notices that your marksmanship scores are unusually high. Steady hands, he says. Watchmaker's hands. You are sent to a sniper school outside Zossen, where a scarred, quiet instructor named Hauptmann Kruger teaches you that a sniper's real weapon is not the rifle. It is stillness. He tells you that most soldiers die because they move when they should wait, and win because they wait when they should move. You think of your father's words and say nothing. At the sniper school, the days are long, and the lessons are strange in their simplicity. Kruger makes you lie motionless in a wet field for 6 hours while ants crawl across your hands, testing whether discomfort can break your concentration before a bullet ever will. He teaches you to breathe in 4 counts and exhale in 4 counts, to squeeze a trigger the way your father taught you to turn a tiny screw, slowly, without force, letting the mechanism do the work rather than your muscle. He tells you a story about a hunter he once knew who could sit in a single tree for 3 days without moving, and says that story is the only thing worth remembering from the entire course. Everything else, he says, is detail. The night before you ship east, you write to Ilse. You tell her the training has been difficult but fair, and that you think of her tomatoes ripening on the vine back home even out here in a field of mud. You do not tell her what the instructors say about the Eastern Front. You do not yet know it yourself. You fold the letter, slide it into your breast pocket beside your father's watch, and for a moment, lying in the dark barracks listening to other men breathe, you let yourself believe the war might end before your hands are ever truly tested. By the summer of 1942, you are moving east with the Sixth Army through Poland, through the endless flat grass of the Ukrainian steppe, toward a city on the Volga River that no one back home can properly pronounce. Otto has been assigned to the same company, and somehow that single fact makes the entire war feel survivable. He becomes your spotter, the second set of eyes that every sniper needs to live. You also meet Kurt, a 17-year-old replacement who lied about his age to enlist and who still writes letters to his mother every single night, even when there is nothing left to say. Kruger warns you that Stalingrad will not be a battlefield in any way you have trained for. He is right. When you arrive in September, the city is already a ruin of broken concrete, twisted rebar, and buildings gutted down to blackened skeletons. The Soviets call it the meat grinder. German soldiers call it Rattenkrieg, the war of the rats, because the fighting happens floor by floor, room by room, sometimes with enemies on opposite sides of the same wall. Your war stops looking like the maps in the briefing tents. There are no clean arrows here, no open fields for a rifle to prove itself at distance. You crawl through collapsed apartment blocks, past furniture still standing in rooms with no ceiling, past a child's shoe sitting untouched in a pile of broken brick. You take your first position in the shattered upper floor of what was once a grain elevator, its concrete walls scarred by 1,000 impacts, its silos towering over a landscape of ash and rubble. Kruger teaches you to read a street like a puzzle. Which window catches morning light? Which doorway a careless soldier will use twice? Which pile of rubble looks abandoned but has been disturbed by a boot in the last hour? Otto watches through binoculars beside you, silent, counting your breaths so you fire between heartbeats the way Kruger taught you. Your first kill happens at 200 meters, a Soviet soldier crossing an open square he believed was empty. You do not feel triumph. You feel your father's watch, warm from your own body heat, pressed against your ribs beneath your tunic. The days blur into a rhythm of waiting that only a watchmaker could understand. Hours spent motionless behind rubble, watching a single window, watching a single doorway, watching for the smallest disturbance in a world already destroyed. The Soviets have their own snipers, and one in particular becomes a story passed between exhausted men in dugouts. A shooter the soldiers call only the Fox, blamed for a dozen deaths in a single week. A shadow that seems to know exactly where German patience will finally break. Kruger tells you the Fox is not a myth. He tells you that somewhere across the ruined street, someone with hands as steady as yours is waiting for you to make the same mistake you're waiting for them to make. For 3 days, you and the Fox trade nothing but silence. Two patient predators refusing to blink first, inside a city already killing itself twice over. On the 4th day, Kurt is sent to run ammunition between positions, a task considered almost safe compared to the grain elevator's upper floors. He never reaches the 2nd position. A single shot, and the boy who wrote to his mother every night falls in the open street and does not move again. Otto has to hold your arm to stop you from firing blind out of grief. That night, you finally understand Kruger's warning in full. This is not marksmanship anymore. It has become something closer to chess played with human lives, and losing a piece changes nothing about the board except how much it hurts to keep playing. 2 days later, through a gap in a collapsed wall 300 meters away, you finally see a flicker of dark cloth in a window that has stayed empty for 72 hours. You do not know if it is the Fox. You will never know for certain. You wait through 11 minutes of stillness before the shape shifts half an inch, exposing a shoulder. You fire once. The window stays empty after that, and somehow the silence that follows is heavier than any gunfire has been. In the days between confirmed kills, the city teaches you things no training field ever could. You learn that a sniper's greatest enemy is not the man across the street, but the hours spent doing nothing at all. Hours where hunger gnaws louder than fear, where your own heartbeat sounds like a drum in the silence, where memories of Ilse's kitchen or your father's workbench arrive uninvited and threaten to loosen the discipline holding you together. Otto keeps a small notebook where he marks the days with a single line, nothing more, because he says numbers are the only thing left that still makes sense. You move positions constantly, because staying in one place for more than a day is an invitation for Soviet artillery to find the range. You learn to move through buildings by punching holes between rooms rather than using doorways, since doorways and windows are exactly where a rival sniper expects a target to appear. You learn to recognize the specific whistle of different mortar calibers, the difference between an outgoing shell and one arriving toward you. A skill that keeps you alive twice during a barrage that levels the building beside the one you are sheltering in. Through it all, you keep your father's watch wound, even when winding it means loosening your grip on the rifle for 10 unbearable seconds. Kruger sees you do this once and says nothing, only nods. as though he understands exactly why a man might risk his life to keep something small and mechanical still counting the hours correctly. Winter arrives with a cruelty the training manuals never mentioned. Temperatures fall far below freezing. Rifles jam. Rations shrink from small to nearly nothing. Horses are killed for meat, then that too runs out. On November 19th, Soviet forces launch Operation Uranus, a massive pincer attack that closes around the entire Sixth Army within 4 days. You listen to the artillery in the distance and understand, the way a trapped animal understands a closing door, that Stalingrad has stopped being a battle you might win and become a battle you might merely survive. Command promises resupply by air. The planes that arrive are never enough, and many never arrive at all. Otto grows thinner every week, his jokes about the tannery smell replaced by a silence you have never heard from him before. You still carry your father's watch. You still whisper his 6 words to yourself before every shot, though now they feel less like advice and more like a prayer you no longer fully believe. Christmas passes inside a cellar with no decoration but a single candle stub shared between 11 men. Someone hums a carol until his voice cracks and no one asks him to continue. In January, the perimeter collapses in pieces. Kruger is killed clearing a doorway you were meant to cover, and there is no time to grieve properly, only time to keep moving, keep watching, keep surviving one more hour the way he taught you to. On January 31st, 1943, the remains of the Sixth Army's southern pocket surrender. You are marched out of the ruins you spent 5 months defending, hands raised, rifle abandoned in the rubble, your father's watch the only object from home still against your chest. Otto walks beside you into captivity, and for one strange moment, surrounded by defeat on every side, you feel something close to relief, simply because he's still walking. The march east into Soviet captivity kills more men than the battle itself. Cold, hunger, and disease take soldiers who survived 5 months of urban combat only to collapse in open snow with nothing left to give. You give Otto half of everything you have, and he does the same for you, an unspoken agreement neither of you ever says aloud. The camp sits somewhere in the endless interior, a collection of low wooden barracks surrounded by wire and watchtowers, and the winters there make Stalingrad's cold feel almost gentle by comparison. You are assigned to logging details, then to a brick factory, then to clearing rubble in a nearby town destroyed by the same war you helped bring to Soviet soil, an irony not lost on the guards who watch you work. Otto develops a persistent cough during the second winter that never fully leaves him, and you trade portions of your own bread for extra soup whenever the guards allow it. The same unspoken arrangement continuing in a different kind of ruin. Some prisoners do not survive the camps, worn down by years of insufficient food and relentless labor, and you learn not to ask too many questions when a bunk stays empty for more than a day. You keep the watch hidden, sewn into the lining of your coat, because prisoners with anything of value quickly lose it to men desperate enough to take it. At night, you run your thumb along the outline of it through the fabric, tracing the shape of the engraving you can no longer see, repeating the 6 words until sleep finally takes you. Years pass inside a prisoner camp in the Soviet interior, years of hard labor, thin soup, and letters home that may or may not ever arrive. You think of Ilsa constantly, uncertain if she still waits, uncertain if Pforzheim still stands, uncertain if your father's shop survived the bombing raids you hear rumors about from other prisoners. The watch in your pocket becomes the only proof that a gentler life ever existed at all. In 1949, after 6 years of captivity, you are finally released and sent home. Otto is released in the same transport, thinner, older in the eyes than any 28-year-old should be, but alive, which by then feels like the only word that matters. Pforzheim in 1949 is barely recognizable. An Allied bombing raid in February 1945 destroyed most of the old town in under half an hour, killing thousands, reducing centuries of clockmaking history to ash in a single night. Your father survived, sheltering in the cellar of a neighbor's house. Your mother did not. The shop itself is gone, replaced by a patch of cleared rubble where wildflowers have begun pushing through broken brick. Ilse is still there. She never married. She says she is not sure why she waited, only that some decisions are not really decisions at all. You marry her within the year, quietly, without the wedding either of you once imagined as children, racing bicycles down a street that no longer fully exists. In the first month's home, sleep does not come easily. A dropped pan in the kitchen sends you flat against the floor before you even understand why your body is moved. Ilse learns not to touch your shoulder while you sleep, learns instead to say your name softly from a distance until your eyes open on their own. Your father, older now and moving slower behind his workbench, never asks what happened in Russia. He only sets a chair beside his own each morning and hands you a loop, the way he did when you were 12, as though the steady, patient work of small gears might eventually stitch something back together that the war tore loose. You find, to your quiet surprise, that it does. The tremor in your hands, the same tremor that once made you fear you would never make a good watchmaker, has vanished entirely. 5 months in a grain elevator taught your hands a stillness no workbench ever could. You do not talk about Stalingrad for a long time. When your children ask what you did in the war, you tell them you were a soldier, and you let the silence answer the rest. Otto rebuilds a small workshop 2 streets from where your father's old shop once stood, and the two of you spend Sunday afternoons in comfortable silence, repairing watches for a town rebuilding itself 1 gear at a time. Neither of you ever says the fox's name, because neither of you ever learned it. And somehow that absence feels correct. 2 strangers who spent a war trying to end each other's lives, reduced finally to nothing more than a shape in a window that stopped moving. You are 74 years old the day your grandson finds your father's pocket watch in a drawer and asks if it is broken, because the second hand no longer moves. You tell him it is not broken. It is simply old, the way you are old, still keeping time in its own quiet way. He asks what the engraving means. Patience survives what courage cannot, you tell him, and for the first time in 50 years, you finally explain why. You tell him about a grain elevator, about a boy named Kurt who never got to grow older, about a friend who shared his last piece of bread in a frozen camp because sharing was the only weapon either of you had left. You tell him that courage gets soldiers into terrible places, but patience, the same patience your great-grandfather taught your father over a watchmaker's bench, is what occasionally, quietly, brings a few of them home. You close the watch case gently, the way you have closed it 10,000 times before, and you place it back into his small hands. Some inheritances are not meant to stop with you. They are meant to keep moving forward, the way a watch keeps moving forward, 1 patient second at a time, long after the person who once needed that patience most has finally learned how to rest.